I will now call to order the Monday, March 12th, 2012 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. I would like to welcome all of those here in attendance at Carnegie Town Hall, those viewing us on CityLink or at siouxfalls.org. We're going to start with a brief report from Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Councilor Aguilar. I'm just standing in for staff excuse me, today. Just a reminder that absentee voting for the April 10th election starts tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. It'll be open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday and until 3 o'clock on Election Day, which is again April 10th. Absentee voting is at the Minnehaha County Auditor's Office in that blue County Administration Building at 415 North Dakota Avenue. If you have questions about the candidates or anything like that, it's all on siouxfalls.org. There's 2 school board seats open, some city council seats, and 3 charter amendments on the ballot. And the Auditor's Office phone number for questions, if you want to call them, is 367-4220. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Erpenbach. We'll now ask for a report on last Monday's fiscal committee meeting from Councilor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last week we didn't have any action items. We just had several discussions. One regarding the contract approval ordinance and how that is progressing. And we also discussed the beginnings of the budget calendar timeline and how we want that presented. And also began the discussion about how to spend remaining CIP budget funds, but no decisions at this point.
Thank you. Any questions for Councilor Brown? If not, Councilor Rolfing, would you like to give us a brief report on the last Urban Ag meeting?
Yes, I would. Last Friday we held an Urban Ag meeting at the main library, and we pretty much finished up the community garden part of the discussion. We've turned it over to Shauna Goldhammer to be able to put together our ordinance, and we'll be meeting on the 30th of this month at the Ronning Edition Library at 3:30 to do the final review on that, and from there we'll go to zoning or the planning commission, I guess, and then back to land use for final look at, and then do this to the council for final review. We will then, as a committee, start looking at the animal part of the urban ag portion of the ordinance. So we'll bring it to you in 2 sections. We fully expect to spend a little bit more time on the animal portion than we did on the gardening part, but we have a good flow on how we're putting it together, and we expect it to go along nicely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Councilor Rolfing? If not, Councilor Anderson, would you like to give us a preview to today's Public Service Committee meeting?
Thank you, Council Chair. Today we'll be reviewing the naming rights ordinances. There'll be a further conversation on the different facilities that may be covered by this ordinance, and taking a look at some other cities that have similar laws in place.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Councilor Anderson? If not, we will move into City Council open discussion. And as we go into this, I would like to start with a few remarks. After the decision of the Open Meetings Commission last Thursday, I understand that the last few days have been difficult to a varying extent for all of us on the City Council. I spent my weekend reviewing the emails we had received on the open meetings matters, the discussions we had in June of 2010 before the Public Services Committee on the topic, the Attorney General's opinion that had governed the topic for the past 20 years, the Commission's directions from the last complaint against our own ethics board. One of the things I also did was to look at what actually can be discussed at an informational meeting or at a public meeting, and I'd like to share that with, again, the council. You did receive this. I did send it to you yesterday, but for the public. I'd like to just kind of review what we are allowed to speak to and what we're not at this point and what our options are. According to City Ordinance Section 12.5-31, Standards of Conduct for City Council Members, we are in Section 1 not allowed to disclose confidential information. Section 2, directly or indirectly use any confidential information which was gained because of our official positions or employment for our own personal gain or benefit or for the benefit of others. Disclose or reveal any information or the contents of any discussion which took place in executive session under the provisions of the state open meetings law. Section 3, disclose or reveal any information or the contents of any discussion considered during an executive session or closed meeting conducted pursuant to the state open meetings law held by the City Council, any city agency, board, commission, committee, or department, except as may be authorized by a majority vote of the body. And I think that Section 6 could also be somewhat pertinent. Engage in any conduct which may be directly prejudicial to the government of the city or which reflects discredit or dishonor on the government of the city, which conduct causes the city substantial monetary damage or the commission of a criminal act. As to revealing anything discussed in executive session, as it does say in Section 3, it allows us through a majority vote of the council to disclose what happens in executive session. However, the following would indicate to me that the official action cannot be taken in an informational meeting, in that Section 2-5, informational meetings and working sessions of the council. The City Council may meet in informational meetings and working sessions which shall be open to the general public to review and discuss matters pertaining to the affairs of the City Council, provided that all discussions and conclusions therefore shall be informal. There are, under our city charter, general powers and duties of the council. Section 2-01, the council shall act as a part-time policy-making and legislative body, avoiding management and administrative issues. Section 2.05, these are prohibitions to the council. Section B, appointments and removal. Neither the City Council nor any of its members shall in any manner control or demand the appointment or removal of any city administrative officer or employee whom the mayor or any subordinate of the mayor empowered to appoint, but the council may express its views and fully and freely discuss with the mayor anything pertaining to appointment or removal of such officers and employees. Section C, interference with administration, except for the purpose of inquiries and investigations under Section 2.09, the council or its members shall deal with city officers and employees who are subject to the discretion and supervision of the mayor, solely through the mayor, and neither the council nor its members shall give orders to any such officer and employee, either publicly or privately. Also, if it is the wish of a council member to present a motion on opening the discussion of an executive session, I would suggest a requested motion should be brought forward and noticed as you would for any matter to be voted on an upcoming council meeting. I will now open discussion. Councilor Jamieson.
I'll break the ice on this one. Help me understand this part. If the city clerk, Deborah Owen, served at the pleasure of the council, we have the authority and the ability to remove an appointed person for whatever reason we feel as a group, whatever that reason is, right?
I would say if that employee is under our jurisdiction,
Right.
if it is an employee of the council.
And Deborah,
That's just my opinion.
well, and Deborah Owen being that person who did serve under the pleasure of the council, do I understand it right then if the council as a group decided to discuss the things that we covered in executive session, we would have to vote in some fashion to allow that to happen?
That is my understanding, that you would need a majority vote in order to make public what happened in executive session. And it would also be my understanding that we cannot take that kind of vote
Right.
in an informational meeting.
So we'd have to come back at a council meeting to
Right.
ask if we could do it.
That is just my understanding.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Brown.
I also want to address the reprimand against us from the Open Meetings Commission. Some have characterized this as nothing more than a hand slap or for bad acts in firing City Clerk Deborah Owen. Others have told me that I'm overreacting to it. I can only tell you how I feel about it, and I tell you I'm sick about it. Mostly I'm disappointed in myself. We broke the law, and for that I sincerely apologize to the citizens of Sioux Falls. First, I'm disappointed in myself because I couldn't stop the majority from firing a city employee who did nothing illegal and who strive for openness in city government and good customer service. I wish we could tell every detail of why Deborah was fired. Trouble is, it involves other employees who can't be dragged into this. Second, I'm sick about this because this reprimand hits at the core of who I am. Because of my journalism background, I've always prided my public service on being an advocate for transparency. I pushed for cameras of these very meetings, these 4 o'clock informational meetings and our committee meetings. That didn't happen 7, 8 years ago. Minimal executive sessions and council approval of contracts. Now, on my way out the door, I let the city attorney's bad legal advice overrule what I said and knew was right. A clear and public vote on Deborah Owen's employment. My error in not speaking out publicly then has tarnished my service. It's tarnished your service forever. Let's be clear about something else. In regards to bringing public scrutiny to employees' terminations, the mayor says it doesn't happen in private business and it shouldn't happen in government either. But that's not how it happened with Bob Amundson, Randy Bartunek, Mike Hall, Judy Boozman, Sally Felix, Jody Schwan when they were fired. The standard there, issue a news release, hold a news conference to publicly say those appointed officials didn't measure up. Attorney Fifley, let me try to put this into perspective of why this reprimand is so upsetting to me. This is a professional indictment of my conduct. From a journalistic perspective, a reprimand by the Open Meetings Commission is the equivalent to a lawyer being censured, maybe even disbarred. I was in an event Saturday evening with the SDSU journalism department. Attorney Fifley, imagine being in front of your law professors 2 days after a censure. In business, when you're given bad advice, there is accountability. I submit that the threshold for that is even higher in government service because we're not dealing with private money. We're dealing with the public's treasury and trust. We broke the public trust. We broke the law. It's not what we did in executive session. It's what we didn't do in the public session. It was only after we broke the law that attorneys Fifley and Gail Eastland scrambled for case law to cover us. The law is clear. The vote wasn't even close. 4 esteemed state's attorney told us we intentionally deceived the public. Furthermore, the one dissension was only because he believes we took no action. In other words, he believes Deborah is still legally employed. Those are 2 grave legal errors. And here's what I find incredibly sad, is that even after this overwhelming defeat, there's been no admission of error. Quite the opposite, in fact. Instead, there's an arrogance, claims that the law is unclear, it's so complicated that these 5 lawyers can't possibly be right. We were wrong. We ought to be contrite. Instead, there's not even a hint of apology. My lack of confidence in the city's attorney's office goes beyond this crime. The city attorney admittedly has a difficult role working both for the administration and the council. In the checks and balances of government, we are bound to be at odds at times. Attorney Fifley assured us that he could manage that. But when you factor in other Fifley opinions, which are political, not legal, my confidence has eroded. Remember, Attorney Fifley has told us it's illegal for us to hire a budget analyst. It's illegal for us to approve contracts. City charter trumps state law. It's time the city attorney lives up to the charter and serves the council as well. Listen, David, I like you personally. You're a smart man, you're a personable man, I've told you that. But he and his assistant, Gail Eason, caused us to commit a crime. That's more culpable than anything Deborah did. I am considering an April 2nd resolution for a vote of no confidence. Legally, that doesn't fire David. It doesn't even discipline Easlin. We, the council, do not have the authority to do either. Only the mayor can hold them accountable. But we have a choice to make. Should we be accountable? Or should we be arrogant and pretend that the Open Meetings Commission doesn't matter, that it doesn't know what it's doing, that our Sioux Falls attorney knows better than 5 legal public servants with decades of experience and expertise in this area of law? I've received emails from elected leaders across the state. They know we, as elected leaders, are ultimately responsible, but they agree city employees also need to be accountable for bad advice. We're going to have to earn the trust of voters again. Attorney Fifley needs to earn that trust as well. He needs a similar reprimand. Through a vote of no confidence, we demonstrate to voters that we take this very seriously, that we are responsible for our illegal actions, and that we, the council, hold public employees accountable as well.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Respectfully, Councilor Brown and I have discussed this at length, but I just want to remind the council that as a council, we listen to our attorney's legal advice based on his legal opinion, and we accepted that legal advice of our attorney, just as we have ignored his advice on more than one occasion regarding the contracts for one, the budget analyst for another. We ignored him flat out. We decided this time that we were following his lead, that we were going to trust what he told us, and we voted in that way based on our the legal opinion of our attorney. And regarding the case law as outlined by Attorney Fifley early on, if you look back at a Public Service Committee meeting in June of 2010, we discussed, and Councilor Brown was the acting chair for that particular meeting. We discussed at that time an Attorney General's opinion from 1990, and I wish that I had gone and looked it up before when we were discussing this, in executive session, but I did it this weekend. And I found this Attorney General's opinion that Attorney Fifley and Gail Easlin had talked to us about in June of 2010. And it talks about the idea that personnel issues and issues that are of legal weight, when we're talking about lawsuits and personnel issues, that we don't, as a public body, we don't have to show our hand. And that is the precedent that has been used in the state of South Dakota for 22 years. And it is the precedent that was violated by our Board of Ethics a few months before we voted on this in an executive session. And our attorneys were chastised then that they violated that precedent by allowing the Board of Ethics to name someone in a personnel issue. And so you cannot tell me at this point that this law is clear, that this particular board is acting in the same way that it always does. It's being somewhat arbitrary, and yeah, I'm as disappointed as anyone else. I hold the same journalism degree that Councilor Brown does from the same professors, and I'm as embarrassed as anyone. But we chose as a council, and we need to stand up as adults and as elected officials, we chose to follow our legal advice just the same way that we have chosen to ignore it on other occasions. And so yes, I'm embarrassed, and yes, I apologize to the citizens of Sioux Falls, but we did what we thought was right, and I will stand on that vote because we did what was right, even though the way that it turned out in terms of the open meeting didn't work out the way that we thought it should. We did the right thing.
Other comments? Councilor Antoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are elected by the citizens of Sioux Falls, by our constituents, to make decisions on behalf of the citizens based on the information that we are provided by anyone who we seek counsel from, whether it's information provided by other citizens, whether it's information provided by our city attorney, by our human resource person, or anybody else that we might seek any opinion of. I think just like the council a lot of times has not shown that it is unanimous in its decisions, we do base our decisions on the facts and our own beliefs. But that's why the citizens voted for us, and that's why they elected us. And quite honestly, if they don't like what we do or what we say or how we vote, they can kick us out by voting and changing when we're up for re-election again. We didn't really violate any law. The precedent had been set. Attorney General's opinions were asked for, and that's exactly what they are, their opinions. The bottom line is, until you go to court and specific law is ruled, everything that we deal with is opinion. We sought the counsel of our city attorney, and I'd like to thank David for that counsel and for our human resource people at one point in time. And at the end of the day, we are the ones that made the decision based on the information or on our personal beliefs. And the vote was not unanimous on that deal either. I believe we did nothing wrong. Are we going to have to change? Sure we are. The ruling came down and it changed. Not a big deal. We just got to change the ways that we look at it. Whether it's in business or whether it's our own personal decisions that we make, we always base our decisions and how we act based on the best counsel we have, on our beliefs, and that's just the way it is. I can tell you what, my mom and dad told me years ago that I shouldn't do something, and I turned around and did it anyway, and it was wrong, okay, and I faced the consequences. And here again, I'm not taking this lightly. Any decision we make affects people. It affects staff, it affects the citizens of Sioux Falls, and we don't take it lightly, but we do the best, the very best that we can. And I believe that we did well here.
Other comments? Councilor Jameson.
I had the privilege of attending that meeting, and I guess when they said that we violated the law, I'm not going to second guess them. And if you watch the meeting, September 14th, and read the minutes of the meeting, it's about as vague as you can get. And I know we were dancing trying to keep Deborah out of the limelight of this whole issue, but we practiced some bad form in removing one of our appointed people. And I don't know, I was kind of surprised at the meeting when one of the guys said that they don't think any official action has ever been taken. I sat back and I thought, right. I'm looking at the minutes right now, and you cannot find the name Deborah Owen, that she was ever removed. It's bad form on our part first, but I'd like to know if, in fact, officially, have we ever removed her? And, for example, I mean, we have two other appointed people in our audience here, Dave Bixler and Rich Oaksall. If we wanted to remove them, how would we do that? We know how we hire them. We're going to be hiring a new city clerk here shortly. We know how to do that through resolution, but how do we do it when we want to remove somebody? We've never done it before. Okay, so we made some mistakes. We went along this path, and we made mistakes. We asked for legal advice. It didn't work out. We goofed. I said, goofed, I guess. But how do we do it? I think that's a fair question. And is Deborah Owen still an employee of the city? If I could get an answer to that, I think I'd go a long way.
Any other comments? Councilor Erpenbach.
I would answer that in that she stood on the Carnegie steps and announced to the media that she had been fired, and she's been collecting unemployment for 6 months. I think that's pretty official.
So is that how we intend to do it with our future removals? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But let's figure this deal out before we get there. And I think we've got some things that we've done in place, put in place, like that operations committee that we're putting together to prevent things like that from happening again. But I was taken back when the guy stated that, I don't know that any official action is ever taken. In fact, if you read the minutes, I mean, all other actions that we take as a council are done by us voting right here. not, I'm sorry to say, but not by some elected or appointed person out on the steps of City Hall or the Carnegie Hall stating she was fired. It seems like we have to take an official action, and maybe sooner than later is the time to make it crystal clear that this body is removing Deborah Owen. It just seems like we need to, or should, just to be official about it. And no other games about it, no other hiding of the story. But if I can't ask the city attorney sitting right here if there is an official record of Deborah Owen's removal, when should I do that?
We'll give the city attorney the chance to respond, but I do have one question of the city attorney. As I was reviewing the emails that you and I had and the discussions that we had, it was my understanding that the city attorney's office did contact the Attorney General's office and did ask prior to any action being taken by this council as to what the process, whether the process that they had indicated in past history as past practice and also in the ethics case that had come before them pertaining to the ethics board for the City of Sioux Falls. Is that correct? Was the city attorney's office contacted, and were we not advised that this was the path to take?
Right, Councilor Aguilar, the Open Meetings Commission in November 18 of 2010 specifically advised me when the Staggers complaint was made. There was a discussion at that meeting regarding the balancing act between what is to be kept confidential on a personnel matter versus what needs to be out in the open on a public meeting for an official action. At that time, the Open Meetings Commission specifically advised me to follow the 1990 Attorney General opinion. That was 8 months before this special meeting of September 14, 2011. Within hours before this September 14, 2011 meeting, Gail Eastland of our office specifically contacted the Attorney General's office, and in particular the legal advisor to the Open Meetings Commission. There had been no written decisions since that time that were contradicting the advice they had given me before. And for the public's information, the Open Meetings Commission was established by the legislature to specifically interpret the open meetings laws. Within hours before this meeting, we confirmed again with the Attorney General's office that this was the same procedure that they were recommending, and that's the recommendation we made to this body that night.
Any other comments? Councilor Rolfing.
So in other words, you're telling us that new precedence was set with this ruling?
Yes, Councilor Rolfing, I've had several contacts from other public bodies, individuals seeking legal advice, and by our rules of ethics, I cannot disclose those contacts because it is a person seeking legal advice, but I can assure you that this, the ripple effect of this change is enormous. It's not a lack of being contrite on our part, but it's simply a fact of this really changed the landscape to an immense degree. Several of these public bodies, I informed them you need to contact your own attorney immediately to go through the impact of the decision. However, they were simply in shock that their personnel actions, the same thing. They weren't identifying employees. They were not identifying the exact nature of the action to be taken, and that's even right here in Minnehaha County. Minnehaha County, when they take personnel matters under consideration, they refer to it a motion to approve routine tasks or routine matters. They do not name the the employees involved or the specific action. However, they reference to a book that's placed in the meeting, and then they print it in the minutes the next week. But their motion itself does not contain, and it's similar to the 1990 opinion.
That was what I took out of this whole thing, is that we've crossed that center line of the public's right to know from the person's privacy. And that disturbs me quite a bit, because we try to be nice a little bit around here and hold that person's ability to, and our ability to do some things that are the right way to do them. and they forced our hand on this, and I don't know if that's the right way to do it or not.
Counselor Anteman.
I think what's really interesting about this whole process is that it was a process that we did go through, and ultimately the city councilors did take a vote, and we worked on it. As the city attorney said, now there is written decisions that came down that now we're going to have to look at how we changed. However, I think people need to understand, too, that we don't take this lightly. But the big problem we have is that any person that works for the city council has 8 bosses. That person has to, one of us can't lay that person off. One of us can't terminate that position. We have to decide how it's going to be done. And in this case, it ended up being 5-3. We made that decision, but I think with the decision that came down from the Open Meetings Commission, now we need to take this to a work session. Now we need to start talking and asking some questions. And I think I would like to move this discussion, and I think rightfully so, that we start this discussion at our upcoming meeting that we have and our working session that we have, so we can figure out how we want to approach this as we go forward and how we're going to change the way that we work and operate underneath these guidelines. And I think that would be the appropriate thing to do as we go forward.
Thank you. Again, we are going to have an operations committee, and I am wondering, Counselor, whether you would like that operations committee to bring a recommendation to the council, or whether you want full council at the upcoming, the agenda has already been published. We can add it. We have 24 hours notice, but
I would like to have us all have this conversation. I think it's an important enough topic that I think that we should start the dialogue that way. Maybe we end up saying, let's pass it on, but I think there's some suggestions that a couple of us have, or some recommendations that we have that don't serve on that committee, and we'd like to have a say in the direction that this goes as we go forward. I think we all have an opinion on this, and I think it would be appropriate that we just have some time aside for this. And if we can't get it done at this meeting, let's schedule another working session and do it then.
fine, thank you. Counselor Anderson.
As we started this process, I just want to say that there was not mistakes, but missteps taken. And I feel that, you know, with those missteps, the process was out of balance by the time we got to a point of removing our chief city clerk. And as Jim Enneman has spoken, I also do believe that we need to take a look at the process that we went through from point A to point Z and take a look at everything that we did, working with, whether it's just the council or maybe even outside council, to take a look at this, the steps that we have made, and find out where those missteps are and correct that. This is the first time we've ever removed an appointed personnel from the city council staff. And I think that we definitely need to make sure that in the future, if this ever happens or has to occur again, that we don't end up with the same result. And I agree with Councilman Edelman that this should be started in a work session, and then we can decide what body or bodies will take a look at it further. But I think that citizen contributions in this are necessary to also regain that confidence that citizens have in the council, whether it's a combination city council, maybe one city attorney or part of HR, and then a couple citizens taking a look at this issue. However, that we do need to go over this process and make sure it does not happen again. And finally, I also agree with many other statements that was said. Ultimately, the city council has to take responsibility for our actions. And our actions did come with a reprimand. And we have to be adults about it and accept that responsibility. And by accepting that, I also want to give our citizens an apology for what happened that day, and I hope that we'll never see it happen again. Thank you.
Counselor Karski.
I guess I'll echo those sentiments. As a council, we were we made a decision based on advice that was given to us, and that advice was an opinion. It wasn't a matter of law or fact. It was an opinion. And as a council, we made a decision based on that advice. And I'm here to stand tall to say we may have made a decision, according to the Open Meetings Council, that was in error. But we did make that decision. We do take our public beating for it, I guess, in the press, and we move on from here. And hopefully, this shouldn't be we do need to address this issue going forward, how we can handle it. It's been years, 16, 17 years since, before any precedents like this had been set, and I hope it's a good long time before we have to face it again. So to put it in a future working session is appropriate, but again, as a counselor, I made a decision, I made a vote that night, feeling in good faith that it was the proper way to go about it. I apologize, it was incorrect, and again, I think we need to move on from here.
Councilor Jamieson?
Maybe it's not fair to put the city attorney on the spot, but I did ask a question of whether or not there is official action that has ever been taken to remove Deborah Owen. If I can get an answer now, and I appreciate maybe you have to research it or something, but if you could please.
I'll turn over to City Attorney Fifley.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. Dave Fifley, the City Attorney. I appreciate the time to, I guess, allay some concerns regarding the legal ramifications of this. Certainly, the decision was startling by any sense of the imagination. However, these 5 state's attorneys who comprise the Open Meetings Commission are certainly doing the best job they can. And I'll respect their decision, and I'll advise you accordingly in the future. And I can assure you that a lot of public bodies across the state are going to be revising their procedures as well on how these are done. Now, in terms of looking at the legal ramifications, an attorney is often not given a court opinion that has clear guidance. In fact, I can submit to you there would be no need for attorneys if the law were that clear and there were clear court decisions about what should happen and what you should do. It's that simple. We have job security, is what lawyers joke about, in the ambiguities and in the gray area. We gave you the best information we had available. To use an old acronym, we got it straight from the horse's mouth, and forgive me, the Assistant Attorney General that I'm stating that to, but we got the advice directly from the horse's mouth. And the Open Meetings Commission specifically told me directly when we had the Kermit Staggers complaint, and I note Mr. Staggers is in the audience today, that in terms of when the Board of Ethics got into trouble regarding an open meeting violation, they had not taken any action and no vote at a public session. The Open Meetings Commission specifically said that needs to be done publicly, but they did state, follow the 1990 Attorney General opinion. Do not name I keep saying that, I apologize. Do not name the employee, do not reference the communications in executive session beyond that as discussed in executive session. That's the same advice that we gave you. Would I give that advice again? Absolutely. That was the best information that our office had available at the time. With hindsight, yes, it's been proven wrong. Did you realize that you probably have 1,000 different items on your agenda in any given year? Our office, I get probably 20 emails an hour asking all sorts of questions. The fact that we were given the best information available, passed it on to you, and it's now proven wrong, I still like our batting average. I'm sorry that you got publicly reprimanded, but I'm not going to back down from the fact that we gave you the best information available to make your decision, and we'll continue to do that in the future. As far as the legal ramifications of what's happened here, I would note that the Open Meetings Commission, it was a 4-1 vote, and only Glenn Brenner, who's the Pennington County State's Attorney, questioned whether an official action took place. He did not reach any decision on that. Now, you need to remember that the Open Meetings Commission can only issue a reprimand if an official action takes place but doesn't follow the open meetings laws. If there's no official action, then there can be no reprimand. And frankly, I think State's Attorney Brenner was trying to throw us a bone there, but no, an official action took place here. How do we know? We had a vote in public, which satisfies most statutory definitions of what a public action is. It's the quality of that vote in terms of the window dressing around it that's the issue. Now, Councilor Erpenbach also alluded to the fact that Deborah Owen has been collecting unemployment insurance. She has. She's been made an affirmative representation to the state of South Dakota that she had been discharged. The state of South Dakota relied upon that representation, and she has been receiving unemployment. She's eligible for 18 months of unemployment. She is receiving the maximum amount, which is $323 per week. So all totaled, she will receive $25,194, I believe, in unemployment. If a back wages claim were made, she was making about $74,000 a year. It's been over 5 months. We're talking about $30,000. The economic scheme of things, if you were to come back and do a public vote, which is completely unnecessary, she would have to give back the unemployment. It would start the clock ticking. We would be able to introduce and contest the unemployment request with any after-acquired evidence. And I have heard, and I will not disclose any confidences, Madam Chair, but we certainly have more than sufficient grounds to not only justify the termination, but also it has been bolstered since she has been gone. Now, legally, as we've talked about, you don't get reprimanded unless there's an official action. Several courts have looked at this very issue, and they keep citing to one particular commentator. The use of invalidation of a statute due to an open meeting violation is open to serious question. The strongest objection to using invalidation as a sanction is that its salutary effect does not seem worth the heavy costs. Both citizens and officials rely on governmental decisions in planning their everyday affairs, and to allow subsequent invalidation of such decisions simply because they were in violation of ambiguously drawn open meeting laws would create a substantial amount of undesirable uncertainty. Now, since that decision came out about 20 years ago, some legislatures have followed that reasoning and have created a specific set of factors for courts to consider if they want to invalidate an action that's been in violation of the open meetings laws. However, South Dakota has not done so. And like many other states around us, they don't invalidate those actions, including Minnesota. I would strongly suggest that you do not have another vote. You already have an official action. Deborah Owen, by collecting unemployment, is stopped legally from claiming now that she was not discharged. And certainly she's made several admissions to the public that she was in fact terminated. If you were to have a new vote, I see two areas. Either we could make it nunc pro tunc, which is Latin to mean going back to the time of September 14th. We have some authority. Maybe that would be possible, but I wouldn't suggest it. However, again, as I alluded to, the termination would actually become effective on the new date of that. Now, what you would do by having a new vote is you would basically be giving her Exhibit A for a back wage claim. I would suggest that we wait until the Open Meetings Commission issues their final decision. During that deliberations, and Councilor Jameson can certainly attest to this, I mean, there were a lot of different opinions going back and forth, but I think the main one was 4 of the 5 felt, at least three of the 5, that expressed in a specific opinion felt there was an official action here. I would be very surprised if they suddenly find that there is no official action. If, however, they come back and they change, the written decision doesn't reflect their deliberations, we can discuss it at that time, and that would be about June. I am sorry that our legal advice led to a bad result here. But did it really? I think legally we protected you from so many possible causes of action, it's not even imaginable. I practiced employment law for many years, and I can tell you that if you would not have followed the recommended procedure of the Open Meetings Commission and the Attorney General here, you would have faced a multitude of possible causes of action, all based on evil motive for trying to be vindictive against Deborah Owen by placing her name and that she's being terminated out in the public. That would have been a source of discovery, and all of you would have been deposed and asked, why didn't you follow what the Open Meetings Commission had been saying before? We were between a rock and a hard place here. We had no choice. As far as the public reprimand goes, I've had other clients in the past who've been public officials. I know it's difficult to see your name out there. I've been subject of it myself the last couple days. I'm always reminded of the Will Rogers quote, that I'd hate to live in a world that's half as bad as newspapers portray it. I think this storm will blow over. In terms of what you did, it was based on the best of motives. You were trying to provide Ms. Owen a safe and a more safer, softer landing than what you would have done if you would have named her and gone the other way and not followed a recommendation. I just want the public to know how open this council is and how open this city government is. Our city website has over 20,000 pages of information on it. Your meetings are televised. Frankly, privately, I've been told by many attorneys, including the Attorney General's office, they are amazed at how we go out of our way to try and comply with the open meeting laws, and all 8 of you need to be applauded for that. And our office is in fairly routine contact with the Attorney General's office to try and ensure that we are complying with the open meetings laws. And September 13, September 14 of 2011, we did the same thing. We're going to continue to do so in the future. And that's all I have. Thank you. If I have any questions.
Councilor Jameson?
David, I obviously understand you were prepared to talk like that, and I think some of your discussion validates some of my questions. That's good, and I appreciate it. But if I had a yellow flag, I'd throw it right at you. The rock and the hard place? Are you kidding me? You could have, Bill O'Toole could have, a whole bunch of other people could have said, you know, the proper way to handle this thing is for us to leave this executive session. You as council members and council leadership take this personnel issue to yourselves in a private setting, discuss with Ms. Owens how you feel and that you no longer want her in your building. Remove her that way. That would have been the best way to do this. Instead, you led us down this path of doing it in a public fashion that has never been done before, in the most embarrassing way that we could probably ever submit one of our employees to. It was your leadership and Bill O'Toole's leadership that brought us out of that executive session to handle it in the way we did. There were a million other ways. What I'm embarrassed about is that I didn't have the moral integrity to do it myself. I was in shock. And I should have said something, and I'm just mad that I didn't. It won't ever happen again like that. We should have, after that vote when it was up, we should have discussed what we were talking about. First off, we should have let Deborah come in and tell us her side of the story. That didn't happen. But we should have done it ourselves.
Councilor Jameson, you were treading on thin ground there as far as what happened at the executive session. And I think we found through comments over the last couple days, just in terms of what are the legal pitfalls if you do so. The Kelloland interview from one city councilor violated the city ordinance as indicated by Councilor Aguilar and has subjected that city councilor to a Board of Ethics complaint. But more importantly, those comments were made not in an official meeting, but in his private home, and therefore he's not cloaked with legislative immunity, and now he has set himself up for a ripe action for defamation by Gail Eastland, Bill O'Toole, and myself. To the extent you make these things public That are the pitfalls, Councilor Jameson. As far as the methods taken, you will note that each one of those commissioners at the Open Meetings Commission, each of them had their own opinion of how this should be handled. But ultimately, the recommendation prior to last Thursday was you don't identify the employee and you don't identify the exact action to be taken.
Councilor Anderson?
Okay, we don't identify the employee, we don't identify the action we're going to take, but in your statements here, you made another statement about how you found more information on Deborah.
Excuse me?
You stated that you found more things on her to validate the decision made by the city council.
Oh, that's
You
regarding
stated
after,
that right
after
here in
acquired evidence,
just a few
Councilor.
minutes ago, you
Right,
stated
right.
that. Okay? Why are you stating that when that should have been part of an executive session? That shouldn't be out in public.
I have not disclosed any information of what
But
is-
you've stated that there's more information, David.
I
So
haven't
I
said
say
what
that
it is,
you're
Counselor.
close to doing the same thing.
I would respectfully disagree, Counselor. I have not disclosed the nature or the content of that information whatsoever.
I think you're very out of order with that comment.
I'm going to end the discussion here unless someone has something else that they would like to say, but I think that Councilor Anderson has something pertaining to the Public Services Committee.
Yes, last week we were given a presentation by the Sustainability Study Committee, and they gave us a draft. On that draft, I have gotten a large amount of public response, and 2 years ago, this study was given to Public Services to where it basically died, and now this is the new draft that has come up. So I'm going to request that this draft be given back to Public Services so that we can work with the Sustainability Study Committee team and make sure that we correct some of the things that we found that the citizens definitely are objecting to.
We would ask the clerk to add that to the committee, future agenda of the Public Services Committee. I am now going to close City Council open discussion and go on to presentations. Internal audit reports from Rich Oaksall, Lead Internal Auditor.
Good afternoon, Councilor. Rich Oaksall from Internal Audit. We have two brief audit reports for you. You have a full agenda. I'll make my comments as quickly as possible. Let's look at the first one. It was the follow-up on the status of audit recommendations. You should have a hard copy in front of you there. Our audit protocol requires that we do follow-up on the status of audit recommendations and that we periodically report back to the City Council. Overall, that we found that management and audited agencies have made considerable progress in addressing issues raised by internal audit. For example, in our 2009 audit of the Convention Center Management Agreement, we identified credit card fees that should have been paid by the management company rather than the city. In October 2011, over $15,000 in credit card fees was paid back into the operating account owned by the city, and we thank Councilmember Aguilar for her efforts to make sure that that happened. And also like to draw attention to one of our, probably our audit that had the most attention. Our highest profile audit was done in 2010 of the Sioux Falls Multicultural Center. The report resulted in 21 recommendations, and we are pleased to report that it appears that all recommendations have been addressed by the Multicultural Center Board of Directors and the Executive Directors. So we'd just like to point that out to you. Are there any questions about that report at this time? We'll move on to the citywide disbursements audit, Internal Audit Report 11-13. The focus on this report was on payroll disbursements. We took a statistical sample of payroll disbursements. Our city payroll includes over 1,100 full-time employees and hundreds of part-time and seasonal employees. Overall, we found that payroll disbursements were accurate. They were supported by documentation made to actual employees and properly recorded in the financial system. However, we did, in our sample, we did identify a case of an employee that was actually having money added to his or her pay that should have been a deduction for family dental premium. Each pay period, the employee was receiving $160 instead of having the family dental plan premium deducted. The error had been going on for 2 years, resulting in an overpayment of over $8,000. We immediately reviewed those results with HR management, and they identified the cause, and they instituted a procedure to routinely review payroll for that sort of type of error going forward. And the employee has been set up on a repayment schedule. So are there any questions about that audit?
Any questions for Rich? If not, thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
We'll now go on to our second presentation, Event Center Project Update, and I understand that Director Mark Cotter will begin.
Good afternoon, Council Chair and Council members. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Today we'll take you through the monthly update, which will be the comprehensive update on the activities that are underway with the new Event Center. I will start, and then Director Turbach, Smith, Cooper, Karen Leonard, and Mayor Huther will close. I'll provide an update on the design and construction activities. The design is developing and advancing forward. We're having significant amount of discussions, as those pictures show, as we meet every other week. The project team does to take a look at the activities that we discussed the prior week, and then ultimately start to identify items that we need to do for the next meeting. That project team, again, is made up of the designers from St. Combs and Coke Hazard, Mortensen Construction, both operating companies of SMG and Global Spectrum are in the room. Our owner's rep from Tegra, city staff, and Councilor Entenman is a part of that group. It's been a very good discussion, and those will continue to go. Second picture is the Design Elements Committee, and this is a committee that's citizen driven, and we've had 2 of our 7 meetings that we've laid out that will be engaged throughout the course of the design. And this committee, again, is there to focus on not only the materials used, the color palettes, furniture, signage, and art. And Councilor Aguilar is part of that group. All right, as we continue to just highlight the input that provided, we have the second citizen committee, which is called the Facility Tenant Committee. Really has the focus of operational and functionality focus. We've had 2 meetings thus far. We have another meeting this week with that team. And Councilor Anderson is a part of that group. The subcontractor open house, we had a fantastic attendance when we did RSVP and publicly announced, really pushing, so we had a good venue to set up for. We received about 100 RSVPs, so we set up the room for about 140, and about 250 attended. So we were busting at the seams for that meeting, very engaged, and I have another slide here soon, but we are planning for the next subcontractor open house as that starts to move forward. Okay, discussions as the design continues. We have a large open house that we're planning for this week from 6 to 8 p.m. at Morningside. We have some floor plans that we'll show today in very brevity, because Don Defliffs, the lead architect, is coming into town with Coke Hazard, and he'll spend time going in detail of every floor of this 4-floor facility, and we just really encourage you to attend to get some one-on-one time with Don, not only in the presentation time, but afterwards to ask him questions. We have additional public open houses that will be scheduled as the design evolves, and then we did talk about that. Our second contractor open house, we'll take that to the next level, where we'll really start to talk about which sections of this building we would expect to be competitive proposal and which sections we expect to be competitive price. And so expect that over the course of the next month. And then one of the key internal review boards for the city for city facilities, the ADA Review Board, and we are scheduled to be on their agenda for April 11th. All right, design update. It is a very iterative process, as we've gotten great feedback on the project team and the 2 citizen committees. We are beyond the 50% completion point for design development. We have a target of May 1st to complete design development drawings, and then that will keep us on track for an August groundbreaking. Okay, these next 4 slides just essentially just show you as the design progresses. Again, I won't go into detail with these since Don is coming into town, and we'll go through the public open house this Thursday evening. But one of the things as you path around with the main entry, we want to make sure that's very open, very functional, and also a very good connection between the convention center, and then as you move around clockwise, the gray area is storage. The blue around the top is the locker rooms. We've spent a significant amount of effort of recent with the teams and the operational companies and the designers on getting very good functional locker rooms that have good shared opportunities between home teams and football teams. The gray area is the mechanical area. And then the marshalling area where you see the semis. Today, Kendra, Shannon Verhey, and myself had the opportunity to go out and see them set up for the Kelly Clarkson concert that is tonight. And just an amazing effort that happens as soon as the Sportsman show closes. The next show goes right in, and the 60 to 70 people that turn that facility over and have it ready for an event tonight is really tells you how important it is to have a very efficient marshalling room. And when we were describing to the promoter that you won't just have one overhead door, that you'll have to do most of those activities outdoors, you'll actually have 4 overhead doors and one that you could drive a semi right onto the floor. They took a breath of fresh air and look forward to coming back. So it was a good taking off point. This is main concourse. Again, come Thursday night to Morningside from 6 to 8 and see the detail of this. Next level, suite level, and last level is upper concourse. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Turbach to take you through the financing. Tracy?
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. In my segment of the presentation today, I do want to talk about the approach that we've selected to financing the Event Center project, and I'll touch on some of the benefits and the reasons behind the selection or the approach that we have selected. The plan is to execute the financing in 2 sales, so we plan to do 2 bond sales. And you might recall last month at our update I did discuss this as one approach that we were considering, and so we have decided on this strategy with the overall intention of utilizing this approach as a way of minimizing our interest costs and at the same time maximizing our opportunities going forward for private dollar participation in the project. The first sale will be the larger of the 2 sales. In fact, we will intend to raise $102 million of the $115 million project budget from this first sale, which will occur tomorrow, by the way. The bids will be received tomorrow morning. And all of the bonds issued in this first sale will be tax-exempt bonds, so there will be no taxable bonds included in this first sale. The second sale that will occur later this year will include some, may be entirely made up of taxable bonds. That will remain to be determined at this point. That's driven, in the mix of taxable versus tax-exempt is driven from the IRS regulations that we deal with regarding the the private activity that will occur in the facility, and you've heard me talk about that in the past. So there will be a need to fund a portion of this project with something other than tax-exempt bonds, and to the extent we have to borrow those dollars, that borrowing will be done on a taxable basis. The amount to be raised from this second sale that will occur later in the year will be determined at a later date and will be driven by at least a couple of things. First of all, the amount will be driven to some extent by any cash that the city cash that becomes available to put into the project, and there are at least a couple of identified potential sources for funding utilizing cash and thereby reducing the amount of the bonds that we would sell in this second sale. The bond counsel that we're working with has advised us to keep our options open in terms of utilizing cash from the sale of naming rights. You folks know that we're proceeding with a process to sell the title sponsorship naming rights for the facility, and Darren Smith will talk about that a little more in just a minute. But the bond counsel has advised us that it may be quite advantageous for the city to utilize some of the cash that is derived from the sale of naming rights for project construction costs, so that we may, by doing that, utilize some of the naming rights cash for the construction on the project. We may open up other potential opportunities for private dollars to be derived from sponsorships. So in effect, utilizing cash from naming rights will assist us in complying with the IRS rules and the limitations on private activity and private payments for the project. And so thereby maximizing, again, the opportunities that we will generate from private dollars. In fact, the process that's going to be laid out for the sale of naming rights will encourage proposals to include an element of upfront cash that we could potentially utilize for construction costs. So that's one element of the sale of the naming rights. In terms of the benefits of utilizing this approach, where we sell the bulk of the bonds early on and more the balance later, one of the greatest advantages of this approach is, first of all, we will on about 90% of the bonds that we will sell, we will lock in our low interest rates tomorrow. I can't tell you what those rates will be, but within 24 hours I'll be able to answer that question. We do anticipate a very competitive bidding environment tomorrow. Interest rates in the market do continue to be very low. They have, in fact, come down some certainly since late last year, and even more so since the first of the year. So we expect a lot of competition for our bond sale tomorrow. At the same time that we will be locking in low rates on a majority of the bonds, we will at the same time reserve and preserve some flexibility as to how we round out and finalize the remainder of the financing package for the project. So it allows us some flexibility going forward to tailor the balance of the project financing to some events that are yet to occur, and namely the sale of the naming rights. So we will hold back raising some of those dollars for a later bond sale, and in the meantime we'll let the naming rights sales process play itself out so we know better where we stand from that perspective. And again, one of the goals of this approach is to appropriately size that second bond issue. We don't want to borrow any more or any less than we will need for the project. That's fairly straightforward. And again, the couple of the factors that will influence the size of that second sale are the sale of the naming rights and how much cash potentially could be generated, and that could be used for construction cost in lieu of selling more bonds. An additional potential decision that could influence the amount of bonds that we would sell at this second sale is the use of city cash that's available for capital projects. You heard me report last month that the city has approximately $4 million in unobligated second penny sales tax dollars, and that's certainly a decision that you folks may choose to make in the future, that you could utilize those dollars for this project. I think it was Councilor Brown that raised that last month at our update when I reported the financial results for 2011, that's a possibility, and that certainly I think is a very viable alternative. Of course, the strategy in sizing, appropriately sizing the second sale, will be to minimize any portion of taxable bonds that are sold. Those do carry a higher rate of interest. So whatever we can do to minimize the amount that we borrow on a taxable basis saves us interest costs over the long term. One of the important goals of this strategy, again, not to repeat myself, but is to maximize the city's ability to utilize private dollars from the naming rights and from other potential sponsorships within the facility itself. And with that, I'll turn it over to Darren Smith, and Darren will go into a little more detail on that naming rights sales process. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Darren Smith, Director of Community Development. As Tracy alluded to, later this week we will launch the process officially pursuing our title sponsor naming rights process. We will utilize a process referred to as a request for expression of interest, or RFEI. Now, having said that, each process oftentimes can take its own unique path. So this Friday, March 16th at 10 a.m., we will have a press conference and we will announce all the details related to that process. We will discuss some of the timelines, and we will begin marketing the RFEI. The goal is to have a title sponsor approved by the City Council and in place in time for the groundbreaking in August. The other process we have out there that's taking place concurrently, an RFP, or request for proposal, for professional sales firms. So this is an RFP seeking proposals from those professional sales firms who specialize in selling public facilities like event centers. The RFP was issued on February 17th. The deadline to submit proposals was this past Thursday, March 8th. We received 4 proposals, which I consider a fairly strong response from that industry. The 4 proposals we received were from CBS Collegiate Sports Properties, Front Row Marketing Services, Legend Sales and Marketing, and the Superlative Group Incorporated. We will be putting a review committee in place. That review committee, at a minimum, will include city staff, a city council member, and a community member. That review committee will do just that. They'll review these 4 proposals we've received, and they will hear presentations from each of these 4 entities when we do that in early April. And now I would like to turn it over to Director Mike Cooper.
Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. I'm going to update everybody concerning a couple tasks that we're working on. One of those is a request for proposals for not only management of the facility, but also for the food and beverage component. And first of all, as we discussed last month, we put together a request for proposal to manage the event facilities, which will include 4 buildings: the new event center, the existing arena and Orpheum Theater, as well as the existing convention center. That RFP has been issued, and it's being limited right now to Global Spectrum and SMG. The timeline for that, as you can see up on the screen, is that the proposals will be due on April 12th. We'll be reviewing those in mid-April. We'll be doing interviews late April, early May, with the intent to award a contract approximately May 11th. And then from there, we'll execute contracts during the summer and then go through a transition period with the firm that is selected. As part of that, we will also be working with the 2 companies in terms of a transition, because one of those obviously will not be selected, so that we'll be working through a transition process, not only for the firm that does get selected, but also for the firm that does not get selected. The second RFP that we talked about last month is pertaining specifically to food and beverage. And there was a question last month about why we would potentially hire a separate company within the facility to manage the food and beverage component. And as we talked some more about our consultant Crossroads, it's not uncommon in the industry to have one company overseeing another company in terms of the food and beverage versus the management. And the advantages of issuing a separate RFP that we still want to pursue would be that it's really going to give us a better, open, transparent process to test the broader market of what's out there in terms of opportunity. And it's going to also give us multiple responses so that we can make sure that we're getting the best financial deal in terms of food and beverage. As of today, we have distributed that RFP to 9 different companies. And it doesn't commit us to selecting any of those 9, but we believe that we need to have that piece of information to compare side by side the food and beverage component along with the management aspect. So we're going to be also putting together a selection committee, much as Darren talked about, and that will also include a combination of staff, outside community members, as well as the Crossroads consultants, so that we can put together review criteria, and as we interview those proposals, we can come up with the best recommendation that will ultimately come to you, the City Council. The same timeline we're going to be using for both requests for proposals. And then finally, we talked about doing a master plan between community development and planning staff to look at development potential in that area of the airport, the event center facility, as well as the Sanford Sports Complex. We talked last time that we've done a number of interviews of developers, landowners, and some of the findings that we've come up with is that there is going to definitely be a market for additional hotel development in the area. Some of the most desirable potential locations that we heard about is, first of all, close proximity to the event center area within pedestrian access as well as within visual access. And that could be on-site or it could be more adjacent to the event center campus itself. Another area that we heard about that could be very attractive is the I-29 Benson Road interchange area. Again, that's going to be driven by our Sanford Sports Complex as well as other development that Sanford Health is working on. They are still planning to move forward this year with 2 major indoor facilities, the Power Center and the Pentagon, and with a discussion in the future about other indoor facilities, including hockey and tennis. That is definitely going to be a major draw or magnet for other types of economic development. The third area that we talked about with those groups would be the Russell Street corridor closer to Interstate 29, which is kind of where the major concentration of hotels has occurred over the years. But we believe that there's potential for other sites within that corridor that could see redevelopment or new development, depending on what the market is going to bear. We also heard that there's an interest in working with developers on other types of uses, such as residential to get more rooftops in the area, and even more employment centers that would drive potentially more weekday and evening activities that would generate even more demand for hotel and room nights. So the favorable hotel sites that we heard about would be vacant land that can be easily developed, fairly fast track, but other redevelopment sites that are in that area could have potential for some exciting development, but might take some assistance in terms of other outside incentives. So that's what we're going to be looking at in more detail between now and the next update that we have, and we'll start to map out in more detail where some of those more specific types of development are most likely to occur. And so with that, we'll turn it over to Karen Leonard with the City Attorney's Office.
Karen Leonard, Assistant City Attorney. We wanted to make you aware of language that was inserted into the 2 RFPs for the management agreement and the food and beverage service agreements. I sent out a memo to all of you last week prior to the RFPs being issued that there is a no contact provision, and that means that any of the firms that could potentially bid on this, we've asked them to refrain from contacting any elected officials, any of the project team members, anybody on the evaluation committee, et cetera, so that we can keep the integrity of the process. That's the only report I have today. And I would turn it over for concluding remarks by Mayor Huther.
Well, good afternoon. We had the luxury of hosting the Summit League basketball tournament last week, along with the luxury of hosting a large home show in our great town. It was fitting that ESPN had an article yesterday, and the article reads, the title, "Host Cities Try to Keep Conference Tourneys." I'm just going to read one short paragraph from that. It said, "College basketball tournaments are multi-million-dollar moneymakers for conferences and host cities. Some cities, like Las Vegas and New York, experience a windfall every year, but others, like Atlanta and Kansas City, are fighting to play host to tournaments more often. Other cities are simply trying to hang on to the tournaments that call them home." We've had the luxury of having the Summit League tournament here in our great town now for a couple of years. And as the article said, we are trying to hang on to the tournaments that call them home. I was fortunate to go to a couple of the games, and as I was walking in, I had women and men from all over our great state and all over this great country. They were talking about the exciting new venue that's coming to Sioux Falls, the Event Center, that a number of folks voted for in this room, as well as a number of folks voted for across the city. I want to thank you for that. It was overwhelmingly positive in terms of what that center did, what the arena did, what the event did last weekend, but more importantly, what the new event center will do going forward. We had record attendance. We certainly had some economic development, and we've got great things to come. We are going to continue our discussions. They'll be more positive next month. I know it's kind of a downer in the room today, and I understand that. But we do want you to stay engaged. There are really positive things going on in our town. I think if we stay focused on those, we're going to keep moving the city forward in a very great way. And we are going to stay open. We're going to stay transparent and with this process. And we'd encourage you to come to the open house on Thursday, as well as we're excited to provide the next update on April 9th. And as David said earlier on in his remarks, I don't think there's a website in the city, or I'm sorry, in the state, and probably I don't know how many websites across the country have near the information that the City of Sioux Falls does when it comes to trying to keep their citizens informed on what's going on in their great town. We now would certainly welcome any questions or comments that the City Council would have. Councilor Aguilar.
Councilor Jameson.
I have a question for probably several of you, but I'll start off. Tracy, I don't remember much discussion about the taxable bonds during the whole process of getting the event center passed and voted on. Help us understand the interest rate difference between the non-taxable and the taxable bonds.
Okay. Of course, there's only one way to find out exactly what the difference is, and that's by selling them. Historically, we're told by our financial advisor that rates on taxable bonds would run somewhere 1.5% to 2% higher than tax-exempt bonds. In today's market, that spread is much narrower than it has historically been. On the very short maturities, what we see today is that there's almost no difference at all borrowing tax-exempt versus taxable on the very shortest maturities.
Okay, very good. Thank you. The other question is with Mike Cooper, perhaps. You know, the council went through great lengths to be engaged in the contract approval process, and for some reason, I'm not sure why, but the management agreement between SMG and Global has created a lot of interest from the public who ask me about it and who's going to do it and who should do it. I appreciate the fact that we're aware of this process starting and that it's engaged, I guess. How can we get somebody on the council involved in those interviews so it doesn't come to us at the end of the day with your own recommendation and you've already negotiated the contract and you're only looking for our approval and now we've got nothing else to add except, well, sounds like a good deal. How could you get somebody from the council engaged in that process?
Are you asking in terms of a voting member or just participating in the process.
Just listening to the
and
interviews
observing.
or something,
Yes.
something to engage us. Otherwise, we're going to get to the end of the dance here and we're going to go, well, what else can we say? We don't know anything. So,
We'll have, I think that's a fair request, because there'll be other, what I call resource people sitting in the room that will not actively be voting or participating, but will be monitoring, and we could certainly open that up.
I think I'd recommend that. I'd just, okay, one other quick question, I think.
But I would just emphasize that
Oh,
those
yes.
will not be public meetings.
Yeah, nice.
Okay.
Funny guy. All
No,
right.
I didn't mean that to be facetious. I mean, I don't
Okay, well, very good. Makes
consider
sense.
that to be.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're negotiating.
Yes.
Darren Smith, if I could. And maybe Mark, I'm not sure, but if I were a big contributor to the whole naming right, and I'm not.
Yeah.
But if I were, and I had a desire to have a certain part of the building designed in a way that I thought would be better, how would that mingle into the Jameson wing or something to create bigger windows, bigger?
Yeah.
Could I do that, and how would that work?
Well, you're going to get me in trouble with Mark, because my answer would be we'll find a way to figure it out. Now, having said that, Mark is the person overseeing design and working most closely with the architects and the contractors. So again, it's hard to give you a black and white answer on that, but we will. As we go through this process, whether it be title sponsor, and then after we get that nailed down, the sponsorship, sales, premium seating, and so forth, that will spin off of that. I think if we have those requests, certainly, depending on the dollar amounts and the value to the city and the facility, that is something we would work very closely. I would work very closely with Mark and the architect and the contractor to see if that is something we could do.
Before I get to Mark, if for instance, I bought a scoreboard, and I would be the one who paid for it, would my name forever be etched on that scoreboard, and then that would be just part of the deal that I gave it to you, so my name stays on it forever?
Yeah, there are so many different sponsorship opportunities, so many different ways of doing it that, frankly, until we get those specific proposals, in looking at other facilities and the way they've done it, both inside and outside, any way you can imagine they've been done. So we just have to wait and see when those proposals come in, what they look like, what we feel is the best value for the city. And I'll let Mark, if he has anything to contribute.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you again. Well, I think there's a couple of different aspects to this. One of the things that we're moving forward quickly on is, and that's why we've engaged 2 outside citizen committees, is things like the building envelope, those materials, the windows, all that will be set here very soon. And we're matching that up against the functional design and the budget. And then the Design Elements Committee that Councilor Aguilar's on, we have an overall theme that we expect that will match for the building. So there's similarities throughout. Now, there certainly might be opportunity if you were to buy a suite or something that has 4 walls that can be more tailored. I would expect that there would be some opportunity there. But I do think we want to be cautious, so it's got a long, enduring architecture approach that as you move throughout the facility, it doesn't drastically change based on one particular sponsorship that might last, for a fixed period of time. So things like the outside envelope, I would say, are going to be set very soon. The overall functional design will be guided by the Citizen Committee, but there certainly will be some opportunities if you were to buy something like a premium suite. Okay?
Councilor Anderson.
Start with Tracy. On this bond sale, could you explain to citizens, is this going to be a limited bond sale, open bond sale that they can participate in, or how are we going to be doing this sale?
Okay. The sale that'll take place tomorrow is done on what's called a competitive basis. So we have advertised and promoted the bond sale, or our financial advisor has, with firms that are in the business of underwriting bond sales. The underwriting firms will bid on the bonds. The underwriting firm that offers us the lowest overall interest cost for the entire bond issue will become the underwriter and the buyer of the bonds. it's the underwriting firm's business then to turn around and sell those bonds to the ultimate investors. Now, typically, on a bond sale of this size, underwriting firms that play in this market of bond issues of this particular size deal with very, very large investors, whether they be insurance companies or mutual funds that invest in municipal bonds and so forth, will very likely see all of the bonds ultimately purchased by a very small number of investors. Now, there's certainly a possibility, depending on who the successful bidder is, that some of those bonds may become available to individual investors. But that's, once we sell the bonds to the underwriter, that's really beyond our control to say whether some of those bonds will become available to individual investors or not. Our primary interest from the city standpoint is to get the best deal we can on the entire bond issue, the lowest overall interest cost.
Okay.
So,
then,
if I can, while I'm still here, I just one more thought in follow-up to Mr. Jameson's question a moment ago regarding the taxable element of the bond issue. If we do end up issuing some taxable bonds, it's important to keep in mind that the only reason we would consider issuing taxable bonds is because the amount of private dollars flowing into the project, either from naming rights, from suite leases, from sponsorships, from food and beverage revenues, all of those private revenue sources are beyond the limits of the IRS to finance the whole thing on a tax-exempt basis. So what's driving potentially the need to issue taxable bonds is what we anticipate as success in generating private dollars for the project. Without that, there wouldn't be a need to issue taxable bonds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Karski. I'm sorry, Councilor Anderson Jr. is not finished.
Sure, thank you. I had, on the naming rights, I don't know who will answer this. We've been pretty firm through this whole process, through the vote and everything, that naming rights was going to be used for operating funds. Yeah. Could you explain why we're sort of changing gears now?
Yeah, I'm going to let Tracy do that. That's really his area.
First of all, let me make it clear that decision has not been made yet. We're simply leaving that door open yet until we know how successful the naming rights sale is, how much money can be derived from that. Again, the bond council has advised us to not close the door to that possibility. And again, it comes back to what we expect or anticipate as a possibility, whether you go so far as to say it's likely that we will be as successful as some have indicated we could be in generating revenues from naming rights and other sponsorships. There are limitations in terms of the amount of money that we can generate from naming rights. The more, let me see if I can explain it this way, the more we generate from the sale of naming rights to a private business, the less room there is, or the more constrained we are to generate revenues from other types of sponsorships. One of the ways we can mitigate that and relax that constraining element of the sale of naming rights is to put those naming rights dollars into the construction. And that's just an oddity, if you will, or a kind of a esoteric element of the tax laws in naming rights. We can put those dollars into construction costs, and they essentially count against us less than if we put them into the operating budget. And by doing so, again, we're driving that. If that decision ultimately is made to put some of those dollars into construction, it's because we want to be able to generate more revenues from other private sponsors.
Okay, and one more question then.
And Councilor Anderson Jr., if I could just, again, we don't want to leave any dollars on the table. Our goal is to maximize the private dollars so that the taxpayers of your district, as well as the taxpayers of the entire city, they win. We will try to maximize the amount of money that we use for those operating expenses that we talked about during the campaign. But at the same time, we're going to reach that cap potentially, and we didn't want to leave any other dollars out there that could potentially come from those naming rights that we can even use towards the construction side of the equation. So it's a win-win for the taxpayer.
Will that come back to the council as far as whatever percentage of naming rights that we're going to use towards construction or towards operating fees?
Again, I think what you're going to see happen is that we'll go out there with the proposals that Darren talked about. We'll go out there and try to get the best deal for the taxpayers of Sioux Falls, and then we'll come back to you with the impact, not only to the potential operating lines of our new event center, but also the construction of it as well. But again, hang in there, Councilor Anderson Jr. We'll do the best we can and try to keep you updated as that goes into play. I mean, the good news is that the demand seems higher than what we ever expected, and knock on wood, I hope it actually plays out the way that we hope.
Last question.
One more.
On the food and beverage RFP, I don't know, Mike or Darren on this. On that RFP, Mike, are we still, it's something that you and I discussed, making sure that we can have multiple vendors? This is just going to be the vendor that will oversee food and beverage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's going to be other opportunities within the facility for multiple vendors.
Similar to other facilities across the country?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Karski.
Mike, don't go too far, thank you. Regarding the same thing, the food and beverage license, would it be possible for us, for the same vendor, or I'm sorry, same management company to bid for both the management company and the management of the food and beverage vendor?
Yes, SMG and Global will be able to bid on both.
Okay,
Yep.
so, okay,
Yes.
interesting. I'm just trying to, we kind of take a little heat for having two management companies and the economies of scale that we lose by having to pay two contracts that way. So I know we're going to be watching that bottom line, but I just was curious if that could happen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question regarding the bonds, Director Turbach, kind of more of a general question. Are our bonds issued as do they have a call provision? Can we prepay them? And I couldn't see us wanting to do that on a very low interest rate bond, but is that typically done?
The bonds that mature after 2022, essentially after 10 years, they will be callable and very likely will be refunded at that point, because of the longer maturities will carry higher coupon rates, and so the closer you get to that call date, the more it'll make sense to refinance those, because then rather than a 12-year bond, it will may become a 2-year bond, and so the rates are lower for those shorter maturities. So even if rates don't change at all, you can gain savings by refinancing those once you hit that 10-year call date.
10th year. Okay, thank you. And then the last question regarding naming rights. When the announcement is made as to who gets to put the name on our $115 million facility, that has immediate value. It becomes known as the Acme Event Center. And there was alluded to that we may ask for money up front. I think that, we shouldn't may ask for money. I think it should become immediate, because as soon as that name is on there, there is value given to that event center sponsor.
Yeah, absolutely. And simply put, that plays into the timing of this. And again, what I mentioned earlier about having that title sponsor potentially in place in time for the groundbreaking, because there is immediate value, and there will be during the entire period of construction. And we've seen that in some cases, although rarely, with other facilities in other communities. Most of them get the name on the building much closer to the time that the building opens. So I think we're in a much better position that way. But yeah, very good point.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. A little more nuts and bolts. Mark, could I ask you a question? A couple weeks ago, I had a district meeting, and this is a question I couldn't answer. I'm not sure we've had follow-up on the soil borings that were done 6 weeks ago, maybe. I don't know when they were done, but we haven't had a report on them. Can you talk about that a little bit and give us kind of an update on where that's at?
Certainly, and I'll probably bring that to my April update, because the structural engineers, they take time to go through that, and until we ultimately lock down the geometrics, they don't lock down where the footings are going to go. And so that iterative process of us getting this internal functional layout, they are, some of the disciplines can get engaged, like mechanical, electrical, plumbing, but the footings and foundations, since we're still working on that geometrics, I haven't made that comment because I know we're still moving some of that aspect. But for my April update, I'll provide an update.
Then if I might, just to follow up to that, the other question that came out of this meeting then was, What if those soil borings, what if those reports come out way different than what we expect? I mean, we have a general idea there's a lot of rock under there, we're going to do some blasting, whatever. What if it turns out to be more than what we expected? Can you talk again about that contractor at risk process and how, if it really does affect the price, how that might play out for the overall building?
Well, we started the process understanding that we, for the initial, only had a few soil borings. And so we had the contractor actually set it up, assuming we were going to drive piles all the way down to the rock. And so my personal opinion is I think we're set fine with the estimate, because you have to be conservative when you don't have the entire story. I think where we're going to see savings is where there is a valley that runs through there that the rock can be as deep as 42 feet. And so where we assume pile driving was going to occur, it's going to go longer. But in the world of driving piles, that's not a very deep pile to drive. Where the rock is more shallow, that's just a lot shallower piles to drive to ultimately get that bearing. So I would say on the front side, we've got an approach I think that's going to fit the budget fine. We might have some opportunity to take some cost out now that we have a true grid of the entire area, and we also know what the soil will be between the floor of the event center and the rock to see if we can actually use that for bearing or not. So I don't mean to go into a long answer, but we started off, I don't want to say heavy, but conservative, and I think that we'll find that I think we'll be okay with the estimate. Now, once we ultimately get past design development, which is at May 1st, and then we start to go into construction documents, we'll start to have a process. Again, there'll be 6 or 7 areas of this building that will ultimately be competitive proposal as opposed to competitive price. And you start to go through that process and understand in detail what those prices are going to be. Then we'll work with the contractor to give us a final guaranteed maximum price. And then that's, if the scope doesn't change, they have to deliver the project at that amount. Right now we're on an initial guaranteed maximum price, and we'll work ultimately to a final guaranteed maximum price.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much. We will need 10 minutes between the adjournment of the informational meeting and the beginning of the Public Service Committee meeting. So that meeting will start at, I'll say 5 minutes to 6. This meeting is adjourned.